Good morning. As I awakened this morning, I recall that I haven't posted or conducted or recorded this podcast for a bit. The reason is that I am working to actually get the courses up that this broadcast is associated with. There are a few such classes, and there is a great deal of material that an individual would be able to actually take the inner journey of self-awareness to become one's authentic self. And then what brings me here today, and I know that this is unfolding, I recognize that, is the statement that as I determined to record this morning, I spoke about ownership in the notes about the description, this inner journey of self-awareness to become one's authentic self, that the journey is one that concerns ownership, what the self owns, to become aware of what the self owns. Now, it is vital to understand what is meant when I speak of the self. That's vital to understand. And one of the ways of understanding that is to consider the writings of an individual named Carl Jung. There is an entire body of work that he did, wherein he speaks of the self, or the makeup of the mind. And I don't want to go beyond the knowledge as far as the articulation of his particular vast writings. But when he speaks of different parts of the mind, what I recall is that he speaks of the conscious mind, one level. He speaks of the unconscious mind. He speaks of the superconscious mind, I believe, as well. And then in another realm, he speaks of ego and psyche. And there are just a number of technical definitions that he speaks of. There is also this aspect of individuals who seek to become and have become scholars, or people who understand at a particular level what it means to be a Jungian scholar. I believe, again, when we speak of Carl Jung, his name is spelled Carl, and the last name is spelled Jung. I believe he was of Swedish, Swiss ethnicity, if I remember correctly. And I don't have my notes right before me at this time, but I believe that's he's of Swedish ethnicity. And just a giant of a man. And you read and study his material. You can do his autobiographical material. Just a giant of a man. And you will discover that he is both, in my estimation, someone who is a person who lives out, what it is that he is speaking about. In this day and time when individuals are trying so hard to redact and make over individuals, it's vital, I believe, that it is absolutely vital that a person understands who a person was in their day, who that person was in their day, and then understand that. Just understand and accept that. This is part of what I'm speaking about when I say that you must own the aspect of the self, and that goes for an individual like the complex person that Carl Jung is or was as he walked this earth. A very complex individual in my definition of complexity, a very complex individual. And to own that about another individual and to own that about oneself, to be unafraid, really, of the depths of the self, and to own that. And what does the self? What is the self? And then what does the self own? What does the self own? A few years ago, as I say to individuals, I was in school at Howard University School of Divinity. I had a professor, and I came to Howard initially when I was a very young high school student at the school that I went to as a high school student. I went to take what was called the SAT, the Scholastic Achievement Test, and discovered that I had made a score that pertained to my going to various schools, and Howard was one of the schools I wanted to go to. And I believe at the time I submitted an application to that school. I know that that would have been around the time when I was 16, 17 years old. And then I know that when I came out of the military, when I was 21, I would have come out of the military, I believe. Then 21, 22, I would have come out of the military. I submitted an application at that time, and I know I was accepted to go to Howard University and had intended to go. But I knew nothing about Howard University. I had just read about it in books, and I became someone who was in awe at what I read, the way that Howard started. And I went to school and went to the school, the campus, walked on what is called the Hill, and saw the giant, huge, imposing buildings that I had read about in a book or in a brochure. And because I did not know how to navigate, I walked off that campus at that time, just went there once. I had no one to guide me or anything, did not know to ask for help or anything like that, and walked off that campus and did not come back to that campus for really over 20-some years. It's amazing. And eventually, when I came back to the campus, the way that I came back was that I read the material, a book really, of a professor whom I did not know was associated with Howard University. But I was fascinated by his work. His work was complex. And so I read the book. The book was called Troubling Biblical Waters. And I read that book maybe at a minimum of at least 8 different times. 8 different times to understand what the professor was saying. That professor was a man named Dr. Cain Hopefelder. I read the book. It was dealing with the concept of righteousness. And he, as he spoke about righteousness, he spoke of different kinds of righteousness that were new to me. And as I read the book, I did not perceive that I understood what was written there. But I wrote various things about the book and my understanding, writing primarily for myself, keeping notes as I did, keeping a journal as I did, and I wrote. No one physically saw my notes. I may have preached and taught about those things that I was being exposed to because it involved a book. It involved the word, which was a principle. Dikaiosune was the Greek word that dealt with the concept of righteousness or justification. And there came a time that a crisis of sorts ensued in my life, and I was transferred from the city of Petersburg, Virginia, to the Washington metropolitan area. And when I was transferred to the Washington metropolitan area is when the crisis really ensued in my life. After I went through a very challenging ordeal that I thought was just the death of me in a certain kind of way. Now notice I said the death of me. It ended a period in my life. It ended a period in my life. And after that happened, I found myself in a classroom at Howard University School of Divinity. In a classroom, studying for my doctorate degree. Dr. Cain Hope Felder was my teacher. He was my teacher, my professor. And in this particular class, the book, or one of the books that we were studying, was a book named Troubling Biblical Waters. One of the assignment was to write an exegetical article or draft of words. And I had spent years studying Dr. Felder's book. Years. I did not know him, had no idea what he looked like, what he sounded like, or anything. Did not have the tools that people have today when it comes to social media or the internet. I did not have those tools. But here I am in his class. How did that happen? And after we had written the class, these preachers who were in the class, after we had written the article or the exegetical paper, our assignment was to sit in front of the class at the desk of Dr. Felder, and Dr. Felder would take our paper and he would critique our paper right before the class. And I watched him do this with a number of students before me, before it was my turn. And what he did was that there were papers that he liked and then those that he didn't. And I was somewhat nearly afraid, and many students were fearful of almost sitting in that chair at Dr. Felder's desk. We are pretty much, we are all adults. We are all ministers. We are male and female, and we are in awe of this man and his stature, his ability to do the Greek and the Hebrew. We in other languages as well. He could stand before us and speak these languages and speak French right before us, which was astounding to us. And I don't recall if he did Spanish and other languages as well, but he could do it right before us. And it was just something that was a marvel to me. And I was in awe. When it was my turn to sit in that chair, Dr. Felder read perhaps the first sentence or two of my paper. And he began to exclaim his appreciation of the paper. He said over and over again, yes, over and over and over again. It was a paper that he appreciated because it captured what he wanted to see in a paper. It was my introduction to Dr. Cain Hofelder and his tutoring of me, his guiding of me. When there was a day when I had a question for Dr. Felder, I made an appointment to go to his office to be there with him in his office, which was a privilege, considering the amount of time that we could actually spend in a one-on-one with Dr. Felder. I went to his office that day. I had my questions. He very kindly sat, listened to, and answered my questions, which perhaps took all of, say, 15 minutes. And then he asked me a question. He said, "Do you know why you have come to my office today?" I said, "Yes, get my questions answered." And then he said, "No, you've come to my office today because I would like for you to be my graduate assistant." I did not know exactly what that meant, but I was definite about that it had great implications for me. And he was definite about it having great implications for me as well as for him. And that day I became the graduate assistant of Dr. Cain Hofelder. It was just a wonderful, marvelous exposure. I got to teach his classes, to participate in the classes with him. I learned to check papers, and wherein I gave everybody A's, he said, "No, you cannot do that. You must discern the differences in these papers. You must be clear about what you are looking at, what you're looking for, what's in the paper, what makes one paper. All of them are good, but not all of them are great. And you must be clear about what you're looking for." And he taught me that. And just that was a very powerful learning experience for me. He also became the chair of my dissertation, my first dissertation. He was a chair for me, as we call it, or the mentor, the guide. And again, a very amazing experience. So let me recap what I just said. I had an experience wherein life was going really, really well. And then there was an upset. In transformative learning theory, that is called a disorienting event. In the hero's journey, it is called a call to adventure. And eventually, or at that time, a person may see these things as something good. Another word for it is perturbation. But when they happen, they are not perceived as something that is positive. It is actually that most individuals, or many individuals, when they have the call to adventure, they refuse it. They say, no, I'm not taking this journey at all. What does a disorienting event or call to adventure look like? Well, in the movie Star Wars, another Star Wars comes out in 2019, December, somewhere between December the 10th and December the 17th, I think, something to that effect. And it comes out. But in the original Star Wars, if you recall, there was the call to adventure that came to Luke Skywalker. The experience was that the Empire, I believe, had attacked the rebel forces and had captured a starship, and it was moving through the sky. And then the Princess Leia was there, and she sends a message to find Obi-Wan Kenobi. But the message is in the form of a droid. He is supposed to deliver it, R2-D2, I believe it is supposed to deliver it to Obi-Wan Kenobi. It lands on a planet, and then at that planet, it is found by this father, uncle of a person named Luke Skywalker. And Luke Skywalker, in trying to fix or to make sure that the droid works, discovers that there is a message that is hidden inside of the droid. And the droid's message that is inside of the droid, it says, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. And so, eventually, Luke Skywalker finds Obi-Wan Kenobi. And he finds him, or Obi-Wan Kenobi finds Luke Skywalker, because Luke Skywalker is about to be hurt by these little people. I forget the names. They have a name, and experts in that area would have a name as to these sand people, I believe they are called. And they're about to hurt him and take his little scooter there that he rides on and all of those things. And Obi-Wan Kenobi gives out a particular yell and stops them from hurting him even more. And then, of course, they play the message, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi says to Luke Skywalker, I want you to go with me to fight the rebels, or to fight the Empire, to join the rebels, fight the Empire, to answer the call that Princess Leia had sent, of course. Luke Skywalker says, no, it's a call to adventure. And Luke Skywalker says, no, I'm not doing that because of the fact that I've got to work for my uncle. But Luke Skywalker is the son of a Jedi Knight. He says, I've got to work on the farm with my uncle. And, of course, when he tries to go back to where his uncle's farm was, he finds that the Empire has destroyed the farm and killed his aunt and his uncle. He refused to call. He received the call. He refused to call. And then he accepts the call. I received the book, bought a book. Then I read it, didn't understand it, and certainly was not going to follow it to Howard University to find its author or anything like that. I read it. But then through some tumultuous events, I ended up years later going to Howard University, meeting Dr. Felder. What a journey that was to do my dissertation. And that dissertation and that experience with Dr. Felder eventually brings me even to this place that I am today, which is a good place, but it's still part of this inner journey. What does the self own in all of this? What did Luke Skywalker own in all of the Star Wars movies, all of the Star Wars trilogies? When you think about it, what did he own? And I would venture to say that you could say he owned, if you will, the force that was within him. That's not exactly the way that I look at it. Own meaning ownership as something that one has control over. That's a little bit different from owning like an iPhone or owning a home or owning anything. But own in the sense of this which is within me is mine, my unique part of this whole that is called the force. My unique identity, that's the key. My unique identity, there's no other like me in this force. No other. This is what made Luke Skywalker. Think about that last name, Skywalker. Goes from riding his little scooter, becomes a Jedi Knight, and walks the skies in these amazing ships, spaceships. And if you imagine that the universe represents the mind, and see the stars as thoughts congealed in one place, and your ability to handle various concepts and ideas, and you moving from one idea or one principle to another to connect another and another and another. That's a hero's journey or a heroine's journey. But it takes the ownership of that. I had a conversation with my grandchildren, and they were talking about Star Wars, and we go through the process of the protagonists and then the antagonists, and we go through that, and I describe to them who is or what is a protagonist and what is an antagonist. And then I ask them in the Star Wars movie, who is each character? Who is each one of those? Who is the protagonist? And they begin, and then we go through that process, and who is the antagonist? And I watch how their minds just move like from one star to another, and to another, and to another. These are young children. Young children who with me are like I was with Dr. Felder. The only difference is that when I was with Dr. Felder, I was something like 30-some plus years old, in my late 30s. My grandchildren, the two that I was working with, are like maybe 12 and 10. That's the difference. That's the difference. What do you own? Your place in the force, your place in God, your place in spirit. What is unique is you, God in you as the individual. That's the journey to discover God in you as the individual. That's the journey. To marry past, present, and future. There's something common about all of that. We'll talk about that next time. Blessings.